right, welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Really excited to have so many of you here. We've also got about 20 people on Zoom. Our wonderful colleagues from the City Channel are here recording the meeting for us, and if you signed in, we'll be sure to post the recording from the meeting to the Engage page and get that out to folks. Hopefully within 5 business days is what we're striving for there. Hopefully most of you found this through the Engage page. We'll have a link up to the Engage page after, but we'll also be sending that out via email to folks that registered and signed in. Before we get too far into the presentation, I want to introduce Councilman Kari Mosley, Councilwoman Deb Gross, and bring them up and give them a chance to introduce themselves.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Councilman and I were just joking how you were really on the borderline between District 7 and District 9. Just to the middle of the street behind us, it's still District 7, and then we turn into District 9. So we appreciate everyone being here, and I just want to say how great it is to finally get to this stage of a meeting where we have funding in place. We have a commitment from the Mayor's office and from the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure to actually implement some safety changes. We have had these requests. Some of you have been calling out to us for years for increased safety on these intersections. We were able to start Stanton Avenue Phase 1 in the fall of 2022, I believe it was. I think my staff just told me, and I'm not sure if I remembered it correctly. But of course, that even had taken years in the planning to make sure that we had reached all the outreach, try to get the priorities to the administration, get the funding in place. So we're happy that section got done, and we're here today to talk about Phase 2. So thank you all for all of your support and input over the years. Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, Councilwoman. As the Councilwoman said, I'm one of the newest members of Council, as well as with Councilman Bob Charlin. I'm Kari Mosley. I represent District 9, everything this way. Really honored to be here. I said, during the campaign that, we need multimodal solutions to really transform, our city into what it can be. And there's no great city anywhere in the world that can only be experienced through an automobile. So I'm really excited about the opportunities that we have to work together. Really excited to continue working with my old friend, Councilwoman Gross, now in this new capacity to show, the type of kind of multiplier effect we can have when you have 2 council members, working together. And I know there's a number of neighborhoods, in the East End, around the border of District 7 and District 9 that now have the luxury of 2 council members, being that, we work so closely together because of our friendship, but also our professional relationship as well. And also what's so important is the community engagement part. We worked really hard to make sure the community knew about this and really sat down with the good folks at DOMI, the good folks at the Mayor's office. Definitely have to give them a shout out, Jan Rather as well. As I see Ashley Bryan in the back as well, and James from Councilwoman Gross's office, and I see Grace Stanford, Tracy and Leslie from my office as well. So again, this is like truly a team effort, and part of the team is the community. So it's going to take all of us working together, various levels of government, as well as the community working together to really transform the city into a place we can all be proud of. So thanks so much for the opportunity, and look forward to a rich discussion tonight.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, meeting tonight is about Stanton Ave, Complete Street, Phase 2. Do you mind taking the slides for me? So we've already done some welcome and introductions. We'll do a couple more. We'll do a brief review of the meeting norms. We'll do a safety overview for folks here. We'll go over some stuff for the folks on Zoom. Then we'll dive into the purpose of the meeting, the project context, the proposed improvements, and then we'll have time for questions. I know a lot of that seems like housekeeping, but really the majority of the presentation will be about the project itself. So we're joined tonight by my colleague, Paige Anderson, project manager in DOMI, who will be leading most of the presentation. Katie Trupo, project engineer in Domi. Myself, Jan Rather, I'm the infrastructure engagement specialist in the mayor's office. Laura Tutsui's running Zoom for us. She's our digital engagement coordinator, does our mayor's office newsletter. And then in the back, Ashley Bryant, who's the neighborhood engagement coordinator for, I think, all of the neighborhoods that border Stanton Avenue. So if you have any neighborhood issues, Ashley's your go-to. So just want to lay some ground rules, some meeting norms that we try and set for these meetings. Community meetings are not always, they can have some heat and spice to them, but we want to kind of lay some ground rules so that we can all go home feeling good about the project, feeling like we learned something. So first and foremost is your physical and psychological safety. Have some safety stuff we'll go over in a second. Encourage you to listen to learn so you can take something home from this meeting. We ask that you disagree respectfully. There's going to be stuff you love on these slides, things you disagree with. We just ask that you do so in a respectful manner. Appreciate differences of opinion in the room. You and your neighbor may feel totally different about what you're going to see here. With that said, we want folks to be open to new ideas, trying some new stuff out here. Want folks to be open to that. And then most importantly, I think, is being present so that, when you go home from this, you again, really feel like you've learned something, have thoughts, can share with your friends and family, neighbors, et cetera. So real quick, safety overview. Safety is paramount for us, even at these community meetings. I think most of you came in through these entrances. That's also probably the best exit. It looks like there's an emergency exit here as well. There's a first aid kit in the closet just to the right here. My colleague Laura Tsutsui is CPR certified. If anybody were to need that, just let us know, please. And then if somebody is experiencing some sort of medical emergency, I'll be the one to call 911. And if I'm experiencing a medical emergency, I would hope that somebody here would do the same for me. For those folks on Zoom, we just ask that you remain muted. When we get to the questions section, please raise your hand. And then also use the chat function. And the way we're going to do the questions, I have a tendency to not see the folks on Zoom when I'm standing up here, so we're going to try and bounce back and forth between questions in the room, questions in Zoom. So I'm going to try and hold myself to that. So for anybody who I cut off and move to another question on Zoom, that's why I'm not trying to ignore anybody in the room. So real quick, the purpose of the meeting is to share the safety context and planned improvements along the Stanton Avenue corridor between Chislett and Heberton and Meadow Street. Some of the project background: in 2017, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure installed quick build traffic calming measures. In 2020, the Bike Plus plan identified Stanton Ave between Butler Street and Highland Ave as a corridor connection. And you'll see that on a map in a second. Similar projects or adjacent projects were completed in 2022, Stanton Ave Phase 1, which is the climbing lane from McCandless to Chislett, as well as traffic calming. And then the Stanton-Negley traffic signal just here was also completed in 2022. In 2023, Council District 7, Councilwoman Gross secured funding for the Stanton Avenue Phase 2. Domi started data collection on the project. Last fall, we held a corridor walkthrough with folks from the neighborhood, like Pittsburgh, the council offices, as well as the mayor's office in Domi. And then, as most of you have seen in the fall, Domi installed the Phase 1 of Phase 2, which were the speed tables between Highland and Meadow. Now in 2024, hopefully you all have been aware of the news that the city, the mayor's office, council are recommitting to Vision Zero. Part of that was thorough analysis of our city streets to identify what Domi is calling the high injury network. So these are the streets in the city of Pittsburgh. It's 10%, I think, of road miles where 80% of our accidents are. And so Domi's really trying to be proactive in addressing safety issues on and throughout that high injury network. Domi also began Stanton Ave Phase 2 project design, which you'll be seeing today. Just a reminder for folks, the scope of the project is Stanton Ave from Chislett to Heberton with quick build materials. I'm sure we'll hear folks who are interested in things like traffic signals, but again, this is really a quick build corridor safety project. And the goal is to calm traffic, improve safety for pedestrians, cyclists, but really all users on Stanton Avenue. Just another quick word about Vision Zero before I hand it off to Paige. We're really on the heels of a really tragic situation in the city of Pittsburgh. 21 people died in our city on city streets last year. And DOMI is really trying to take a chunk out of addressing those safety concerns, which is why we're starting with projects like Stanton Avenue, which are on the high injury network. Fortunately, we know that things like slowing people down, adding safety elements, speed humps, making pedestrians more visible are things that reduce the number of crashes and especially reduce the severity of crashes. And Paige is going to talk a little bit more about that in the presentation now.
Thanks, Jan. And thank you all for being here today. I know it was a really beautiful day outside, and I appreciate you making the time to be here. So to give some more context to the street, I know most of you live around here, and this is not news to you, but for those of you that aren't fully aware of the context, I thought it'd be good to go over it. Stanton is a main thoroughfare between mostly residential neighborhood, although there's a lot of businesses and community centers like this along the corridor as well. There's also a lot of transit access, which I think is an important factor here, not only for East Liberty and Highland Park, but also Stanton Heights and Morningside and the surrounding neighborhoods. There's also a pretty dense bike network in the area. Not only do we have Stanton Avenue Phase 1 that we talked about, the bike lanes on Negley, we also have the North Euclid Neighborway, and I know that we have proposed, and the community has discussed, a future bike lanes on Highland Ave. Something kind of interesting about Stanton Ave is that it's between Chislett and Highland, it's 36 feet from curb to curb, but it narrows down to 30 feet between Highland and Meadow on the project scope. So our current conditions are pretty straightforward: 2 parking lanes and 2 travel lanes on the Chislett to Highland area, but then as it goes past, there's 1 less parking lane. It's a little bit narrower. Data that we have collected shows that 85th percentile speed, which is our standard measure, is 32 miles per hour with 68% speeding with current conditions between Chislett and Highland. And then on the Highland to Heberton part, we initially had 30 mile per hour, 85th percentile speeds with 48% speeding. We've already seen a pretty dramatic reduction in that with the installation of the 2 speed tables last fall. So we brought the 85th percentile down 5 miles per hour to 25 miles per hour at the speed limit, and 28% speeding. We are proposing further traffic calming along there that we'll dive into, so we're hoping that we can bring these speeds down even further. I think it's important to set this up by looking at the crash history. There's a lot of crashes here. It's no wonder that this ended up on our high injury network. We tend to pick a 5-year period to be our common analysis, and 47 reported crashes in less than a mile is a lot of crashes. That's included 2 bicycle crashes that had resulted in 1 injury and 1 fatality, and 4 pedestrian crashes that all resulted in injury. Actually, if you could go back real quick, I forgot to say one thing. One other thing I just wanted to note is they're very concentrated between Chislett and Highland. We actually have a pretty big drop-off in crashes once you go past Highland. And the other thing I'll add is that the intersection with the worst crash history is Negley. We are proposing safety improvements there, but this crash data was all collected before we updated the traffic signals, so we're hoping that things are already looking better there, but we haven't been able to analyze that fully because it hasn't been long enough. So the tools that we have for traffic calming that we're proposing here, the primary ones are always going to be about reducing corridor speeds. So when we collect data, it's always going to be mid-block on the corridor so that it's the average speed throughout the corridor. We'll never collect data like right at a speed hump. But we've collected a lot of data while we've been doing traffic calming at DOMI, and we've seen a lot of really good results. We're proposing speed tables on Stanton, which are similar to speed humps, but a little less aggressive. They're much better for buses and for the high volumes that we have on Stanton. And in other projects throughout the city, we've seen a 7 mile per hour reduction in 85th percentile speeds with these treatments and a 56% reduction in percent speeding. We've also analyzed bump outs and pedestrian islands, which we classify as horizontal deflection. So rather than a bump over, it kind of forces you to slow down by forcing you to move horizontally through the intersection. These are great because they focus the calming at the intersection. Intersections are where 2/3 of crashes occur, so they're the most important place to see these updates. And they also can improve sightlines at the intersections and make it easier for pedestrians to cross, especially an uncontrolled crossing, which means there's no traffic signal or stop sign, because it allows you to cross one leg, have a moment of refuge, and then continue crossing the intersection. So we're proposing these at many of the intersections on Stanton, as you'll see. Some other tools for traffic calming. These are all specific ones that were called out in the Federal Highway Administration's safety proven countermeasures, and things that you'll see throughout the corridor. Adding bike lanes to a 2-lane local road has shown to reduce total roadway crashes by 30%, and that's all users, including pedestrians and motor vehicle crashes. Adding pedestrian refuge islands results in a 56% reduction in pedestrian crashes. And adding a warranted left turn lane to a signalized intersection typically reduces total intersection crashes by 30 to 50%, which is one of the things that we added to Negley when we made those safety upgrades at the intersection. So what we're proposing on the corridor, the biggest change that you will see is that we are going to consolidate parking for one parking lane instead of the two that you currently have between Chislett and Highland, and add 2 bike lanes. We are proposing different sides of the street for which side we consolidate parking. The reason for that is that we know that bikes will be moving slower in the uphill direction, and there is a slight slope change around Negley in the average grade for these blocks. So we think it'll be best to have the climbing lane, the uphill direction where bikes are moving slower, be the one that's closest to parked cars. And then if you're moving faster in the downhill direction, you'll have just the curb next to you with less, a little more predictable behavior. And then from Highland to Heberton, we're proposing a shared condition just with these additional traffic calming measures. So one intersection that we talked about a lot at the walkthrough with the community stakeholders is Hetz Ave. We think that some of the reasons for the less than safe conditions and less comfortable conditions is the angle that Hetz Ave intersects with Stanton. And so we're going to use quick build materials to tee off the intersection and kind of force vehicles that are turning to do so more slowly. Though, again, these bump outs are a good example of like the improved sight lines where you can more easily see approaching vehicles before you make your choice, proceed into the intersection. It's also a really good example of that horizontal deflection with a pedestrian refuge island. This is, like many intersections, is an intersection with a bus stop. So we're working with PRT. Again, these are not final plans, but we're working with PRT so we can move the bus stop to somewhere from this near side to the far side. So that way we can provide additional protection to that bike lane around that corner with flex posts that we wouldn't be able to otherwise because it might prevent the bus from pulling to the curb. So we're going to work with PRT on all of these designs, but this is what we're proposing now. You also see the bidirectional bike lanes and an example of the speed tables. Looking at Stanton at Negley, we are proposing, this is where you can see that the shift in parking, which side it's on, is we think that it's best to shift it at Samantha, and there's a few reasons for this. We're proposing a bus boarding island at the approach of Negley. which would, unlike the rest of this, be made out of concrete because it would, need to provide that curve for ADA access and to the buses. This will do a lot for the safety of the intersection because it will act similar to a bump out by constraining the curb-to-curb width as vehicles approach Negley, kind of stop some of the behavior we see with people squeezing around to make rights when we do have a no right on red sign there that is often ignored, while providing a lot of comfort for the transit users. This is the busiest bus stop on Stanton in the project scope. It has the most amount of getting on the bus, so we think it's a good spot to concentrate some of our budget and improve and offer improvements like this. Oh, I'm sorry, one other thing. Also, we've been talking with PRT, and they're proposing bringing, in 2025 or 2026, bringing back the POGO station here. So we'll be working with them to try to find a good spot for that. I'm not going to go through every intersection, although, like we said, we will be posting the final designs as once they're further along. But these are some really good examples of the uncontrolled intersections throughout the corridor. Again, we're proposing pedestrian refuge islands that kind of offer that horizontal deflection that we were talking about, the speed tables, some elements of protected bike lanes at the intersections, as you can see, with flex posts. And again, we'll be working with PRT to make sure that all of these work well with their the transit. Stanton at Highland was another intersection that we had heard a lot about at the walkthrough. Me and a few of the other traffic engineers went to and I did multiple field views here, and we understand why it feels so uncomfortable and dangerous. There's a lot of turning vehicles at this intersection. So we are proposing adding the left turn lanes to North Highland Ave. The reason for this is it's a upgrade we can make that should, again, reduce total intersection crashes by 30 to 50%, according to FHWA. And the reason it improves safety is because it improves some sight lines, it allows for more predictability, and we think it will increase yielding to pedestrian compliance, which seems to be one of the bigger concerns here, just given how many vehicles are turning. On Stanton, we're proposing protecting the bike lane at this approach, and but maintaining the current configuration otherwise. And then finally, a few examples, well, not finally, sorry, there's one more after this, but a few examples from further down with that shared condition. At stop-controlled intersections where we're proposing bump outs, which again improves sight lines, can reduce speeds, and can help with visibility between cars and pedestrians that might be waiting to cross. And then similarly, where the parking shifts at Collins, that's another horizontal deflection coupled with the speed table that was recently installed. Okay, this is the fast one. So at Heberton and Meadow, this is a very large intersection, another one that came up a lot in the stakeholder walkthrough. We think what would be best with the quick build materials we have is to make quick build bump outs to tighten it up. It will make crossing distances for pedestrians much shorter, it'll make sight lines much better, and it should make for more predictable, slower moving vehicles through the intersection. So that's the end of the design. We'll take some questions. I think next steps is that we will again be posting some final designs as well as construction updates to the Engage page. So please keep an eye on that. I also just wanted to mention that on the 20th, the POGO is going to be having a large community coalition meeting where they'll talk about the full system expansion, not just the one at this intersection. Thank you.
Thank you, Paige. Again, the Engage page is up here if anybody wants to snap a picture of that. Otherwise, again, if you registered, you'll be getting an email after this. I also forgot to mention at the top, but I really want to thank Mount Ararat for hosting us tonight. We really appreciate them putting together the space, having us all here tonight. So big shout out to them for having us. So I think we'll move into questions. This microphone, unfortunately, needs to kind of stay here because it's what's broadcasting to Zoom. So what we found works best is if you can shout out your question, we'll try and repeat it up here and then also answer it up here. It also just reduces the amount of moving the mic back and forth. So I think we'll start with any questions in the room. And then, like I said, if there's questions on Zoom, Laura will flag me down and we'll answer those as well. Yep.
My name is Ricky, and I'm with the Highland Park Facility Bike Ped Committee. We're an organization that's been advocating for this since 2015. We first submitted a capital budget request for bike lanes on Stanton Avenue. So it's a long time coming. It's something we've been pushing for a very long time. We also did a walkthrough last summer with representation from Councilwoman Gross's office. We had over a dozen neighbors show up and walk the entire corridor. People pointed out areas that they wanted to see improvements on, and it was a great turnout. We also issued, in collaboration with Stanton High School Streets, a petition where we got over 250 signatures from people around the city, including things in support of bike lanes. So we've been pushing a long time to see these improvements made, and it's great to see these plans. I'm very excited, and I want to thank Domi for all your hard work that you put into this. I also want to thank Councilman Gross and Councilman Moses for all the thought you put into this as well. The question that I have is, at Euclid, one thing that we had discussed was a traffic, or a diverter for vehicles, and I'm curious if that would be incorporated into the plan.
So for anybody on Zoom, Abe started off by thanking a lot of people, but the main question was about a traffic diverter at Euclid and whether that was part of the project.
Yes. So we did look into that after we had the stakeholder walkthrough. Sorry, is that better? Okay. So we did look in. A traffic diverter is a treatment where you can preclude certain vehicle movements. So you could, and I think the example at Euclid that we talked about with some of the community at the walkthrough was it would kind of harden the center line like a pedestrian refuge island does, and what that would do is not allow left turns or through movements on Euclid, so it would be like rights off of Stanton. We did consider that and we looked into it. We didn't feel as though with the amount of turns that are happening at Euclid that it provided as much safety benefit as we would like to see to make some bigger changes like that. So we weren't sure if it outweighed the cons, I guess, in that example, because we just simply don't see a lot of turns at Euclid, and we don't see a crash history to support that as being the high priority intervention. But I do think it's an interesting idea and a tool that we would like to see used maybe sometime in the future.
There's a question on Zoom.
So someone on Zoom asked, they live in the blue section of Stanton Ave and, basically are asking about parking and pressures on parking that this all brings up. What are your answers to this parking situation, which the plan will greatly increase basically limited ability to park?
Sure.
So again, just for folks on, I guess folks on Zoom can see the question, but for anybody who did not hear Laura, although she can project, question is about parking where it's being consolidated on certain parts of Stanton. And I'll pull up a slide and let Paige talk about it.
Yeah. So luckily at DOMI, we have a policy analyst who's dedicated to side policy. They were able to do a pretty thorough analysis of this road at certain times and in the area of this corridor and in the corridor between Chislett and Highland Ave, which is where we're proposing parking consolidation. We did see just under 50% utilization rate. So we are proposing 50% reduction in parking, kind of in line with that. We also saw even less a less high percentage of use on a lot of the side streets, so we're hoping that a lot of the overflow can be accommodated there. And we think that these safety improvements are a valuable trade-off in that discussion.
There's a question here.
Thanks for all the work that you're doing on this, but is there any way, and I don't know if you're strictly forced to just deal with roadways and curbs and traffic flow, but Is there any way to incorporate more public trash cans when you're doing the redevelopment, installing, the hardware, just because it's a pedestrian walks and dogs around here? It'd be nice to have a few more public trash cans.
So the question was about incorporating other things like public trash cans into the design. I'll let Paige give a brief answer, but the other resource I'll offer is our neighborhood services team, if there's spots where you think there could be trash cans, or you can submit that via 311, and it's something that our Department of Public Works can look into. But I'll let Paige talk about it from a project context.
Yeah, well, I don't have much more to add. I work in the traffic division, which does just work between curb and curb, but I think that that's certainly something that we can relay to DPW and our partners as something we like to see. I think especially maybe at that transit island. I know that that's something that PRT likes to, amenity they like to have in addition to their shelters, so we can definitely look into that.
All right, question on Zoom.
Someone is asking, can you comment on why the intersection with the bus bump out requires cyclists to shift multiple times when traveling in the east direction? This seems like it could be a difficult turn to make, especially if there are people loading and unloading from the bus.
All right, so the question was about the bus loading island and the multiple shifts that cyclists have to make.
Yeah, that's a great question. There is a lot of shifting required here. We are not trying to necessarily slow down bikes, but we are trying to protect bikes by offering, putting flex posts on both sides. So rather than, a typical protected bike lane that might be the whole corridor, this is a similar treatment where we can add some protection to the intersections where we know crashes are most likely to occur. Unfortunately, we can't do that without having some shift for bikes. But what we do know is that bikes are more nimble than cars, and these are not going to be dramatic shifts, although I can understand you might be moving a little slower than ideally, but I think it's worth it for the trade-offs of the safety improvements we can offer by creating the protection at the corners. So that's the reason for the shifts. Oh, and then, sorry, the bus conflict was also another question. So this bus island is pretty wide, so ideally transit riders, and we can work with PRT to maybe even think, we'd like to look into moving the shelter onto the island so that transit riders can cross at a convenient time and then wait on the island. What this also means, bus boarding island, and there's many examples, there's 2 examples downtown that you could see that they're narrower than what we're proposing, but very similar otherwise. And what it means is that the bus doesn't have to pull through the bike lane to get to the curb. So I think overall there'll be maybe perhaps a few more conflicts between bikes and pedestrians, but far less conflicts between bikes and buses, which seems to be a more dangerous problem.
I think I saw a question back here, the guy with the Bucks shirt.
Thank you. My name is President Stanton. I have 2 questions to make a comment. My first question pertains to your phase 1. Before you guys move on to phase 2, what are you guys coming back and fixing the speed bump on phase 1? My understanding is made to not accommodate the fire trucks going up and down. So are you guys coming back, looking at phase 1 and make those corrections?
Do you want to ask your second question, then we can answer both together?
Yeah,
Okay.
the question is sort of in line with the first Zoom one, parking. When you guys put in phase 1, you really negatively impact people with disabilities. There's one family that has a disabled elderly person, we do a big parking from our house, and then they had to fight the spot in front of our house. I have a disabled child, I don't get parking usually, so I have to cross the street. So you say safety is your concern. I'm not hearing anything about protecting people with disabilities, or even any consideration that you guys look at the Americans with Disabilities Act. What are you doing for people with disabilities?
So the question, again, the first part was about the phase 1 speed bumps and them being an obstruction potentially to emergency service vehicles. I think Katie will probably be able to talk about that. And then the second one was a concern about parking and addressing folks with disabilities getting in and out of vehicles and getting to their residences. Is that a fair summary? Okay.
Yeah, so can you guys adjust this? So the first, I'm digging this out. I'm so sorry. So the first question about the speed tables with the slots for like the EMS accommodation, that was initially a pilot of that design, and we did revisit with EMS and do a couple like dry runs with people in the back of an ambulance, and just to see what it actually feels like, whether or not the distribution of those like wheel slots were appropriate, and we've decided to discontinue the slots. So as for the second part of your question, I'm sorry to hear about this, and again, it's these trade-offs that we're talking about, and I think we maybe need to kind of revisit some of the implications of those trade-offs, particularly in your context. I guess, is this something that we can facilitate through neighborhood services? I'd definitely like to have a conversation because I was more involved in phase one. So, but yeah, as for the design of the speed tables, they are the same, height requirements where Paige had mentioned. They're a little more gradual so that it's better for higher volumes, buses, and then EMS vehicles. But yeah, I think revisiting from a different context would.
I appreciate it. In fact, I want you guys to really consider what the negative impact is when we take away the parking, especially when I live on Stanton. I marry see a bike, and when I do, they're already in the area. They're not even here. So it really has a negative impact. It may impact our area.
So the other thing that I'll add with the ADA accommodations is the city is the one that provides ADA curbside parking. And so we, or the department, the city, we have a tough time knowing where folks with disabilities live if they don't already have that accommodation. So what I would encourage folks who know folks with disabilities or who have disabilities would be to reach out to 311 Neighborhood Services, let us know, because it's really hard for us to design with things that we can't take into consideration. So Ashley in the back is with Neighborhood Services. I have my card, and I'll get with you after the meeting. We can talk about it.
Consider locating bike, just assume people that will bike. Should assume that people that disability.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Disability from a bike.
Yeah.
All right.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
We're going to move to a question on Zoom.
Can you talk a little bit about addressing sightlines obstructed by parking at the intersections, especially at Stanton and Hess? It's very difficult to see traffic coming down the hill from the direction of Chislett, both in a car and on a bike, making the turn feel pretty hazardous.
All right. Because folks on Zoom are reading these questions, is anybody having a tough time hearing Laura when she says it? Otherwise, I will not repeat the questions that she's saying. All right.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. We did hear that at the community walkthrough, and so what we are proposing again is using bump outs and these kind of protected intersection elements whenever possible to use flex posts to further preclude parking too close to the intersection so that the sight lines are preserved. I will just add that whenever there is a bus stop, we cannot use flex posts, but we will make sure that there is a no parking sign that aligns with those pavement markings, as well as pavement markings that make it pretty clear that it's not a place to park. So that should help with some of these sightline issues and is the reason for these large gored out bump outs at the intersections.
Getting a little bit hard to keep track of whose hands is going up first, so I'm going to start here and then work our way back.
So I live just over on Mellon Street, and I commute by bicycle all seasons, and take my daughter to school by bicycle. One of the challenges that we run into a lot, especially in this neighborhood, but also along the East Liberty bike lanes, is that the roadway maintenance is not always consistent, and the city is not always very prompt in fixing potholes, overhead obstructions from trees, leaf litter, branches in the roadway, that sort of thing. For one, is there a plan to increase roadway cleaning and maintenance as part of this network? And for two, will the installation of flex posts impede the street sweepers?
Okay, so sort of a multi-part question there about roadway maintenance, whether that will be increased as part of this project, and then whether the flex posts are a hindrance to street sweepers. I'll let Paige answer real quick, but again, anytime you see a roadway maintenance issue, I really encourage folks to submit 311 tickets. It's the best way for us to know what the issues are so that our folks in the Department of Public Works can address them.
Yeah, John's right. I think it is very important that we get these to 311. For example, it may seem sort of silly, but maintenance is actually not within DOMI's realm. It's within DPW's realm. We do our best to compel them to pay special attention to these kinds of investments, but it's not always something that is in our control. But 311s really do, especially like over time, added up, do make a difference in terms of where we can prioritize, because sometimes we don't know where maintenance is needed. That being said, like, we're going to work with them. We have a pretty good relationship with them, and we're always telling them where these projects are in and where we'll need special attention. We are working on longer-term solutions about protected bike lane maintenance because we know it is an issue as it comes now. So this is one of the earliest quick build protected treatments. I think will be a bit of a pilot, but we will be working with them to make sure that they're aware of this and doing their best to try to keep it clear. Yeah.
Can I ask another flex post question? Someone asked, is there a solution to make flex posts last longer to ensure the designs at intersections stand up over time?
I'll let you just answer.
Yeah, so the question was on flex posts and if they can last longer. They last, I think, something that's interesting that I've learned is that they do last longer than it seems. Like, they take many hundreds of hits sometimes before they really go down. We are working always at improving our maintenance with the flex posts, and we have recently, in many cases, upgraded them to a type of flex post that instead of bolting down is in like a cup in the ground. Studies show they last twice as long, so we are hoping to use those, especially in the areas where we know they're the most likely to get hit. And ultimately, I think, though, they are a quick build material that require maintenance that we do our best to bring. In the future, I think it would be great to think about permanent conditions similar to the bus boarding island when funding allows.
Question here. Yep.
I'm on the Hillsborough City Council. I was on the walkthrough as well, so thank you for reflecting a lot of the things that we talked about in that walkthrough. I'm also the president of the Pittsburgh PTA, and that's a K-5 school on Hampton Street, and our feeder pattern goes all the way to Stanton Avenue. We have quite a few students crossing back and forth on Stanton Avenue daily. Could you talk a little bit about what the intersections look like as far as the flex posts and the bump outs relative to small people? We have kindergartners walking home alone sometimes, and so I'm wondering if there's going to be anything that we could make sure that we talk to the kids about, making sure what they're looking for so they can be safe, and maybe also having the city come and talk to us about making sure that kids are safe.
So the question for folks on Zoom is younger, smaller pedestrians crossing Stanton to get to Fulton or presumably anywhere, what the flex posts mean for them and the conditions that they might expect when crossing a street. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that those are a really great example of actually the people that would benefit most, because when cars are parked at the intersection, if you're really tall, people might be able to see you. But if you're really short, those parked cars are going to be even more of a problem. So we hope that the bump outs will help with those sight lines, and that the traffic calming features will make sure that people are moving slowly so that there's more time to react to someone that might be moving, especially a small child walking into the intersection. As for the educational component that you mentioned, I think, Jan, we could maybe connect you with some people at DOMI that do work with the Safe Routes to Schools program or something like that, because I think that's a really great idea. It's really great to know that kids are able to walk to school here. So anything we can do to help.
Will there be a follow-up speed study done after implementation to validate the impact of these changes?
Yeah, the question was if we'll validate this with post-construction data, and the answer is yes. We will always be collecting post-construction data.
Hi, I'm Nancy Levine. I'm a resident of Highland Park. I guess my question is about the speed tables. I'm wondering why up in Stanton Heights, speed tables are a lot higher than they are between Highland and Pemberton. Because it's the same road. My concern is, and I think it's great that they're there, and I think it's great all the work that you're doing here, but this is just a small point, which is I see a lot of cars, particularly like SUVs, that just go flying over them and don't even slow down. And I see from your data that it does look like it does slow vehicles on average, but I think the bigger vehicles like SUVs, it doesn't appear, at least anecdotally, I bike on that road several times a day. And anecdotally, I see that the bigger cars really aren't slowing down. So I'm just wondering if you have any data that looks at the higher speed tables compared to the lower ones to see if it slows down people anymore, if it slows down the bigger vehicles. Because that's a big concern of mine on that road.
Thank you. So the question is about the smaller speed tables versus the larger speed humps, the different uses and contexts, and whether they are effectively slowing down larger vehicles. Although the data shows that overall there's speed reductions, it sounds like there's concerns that maybe larger vehicles in particular are not slowing down as much as maybe desired.
Yeah, so the larger vehicles get, the harder our job is. I will definitely concede that speed humps or tables, it's such a challenge. But we do have city standards for the height of all the speed tables. Speed humps, we like to do at least 3.5, whereas the speed tables will maybe be somewhere in the range of 3.25 inch to 3.5 inches. And I will concede that after doing the post-construction inspection, there's probably a bit of variability between the phase 1 of Stanton, those with the speed slots, and the phase, like, I'll call it like 1B, where we kind of did do those secondary tables. I will say that the likelihood of us like going and altering the tables that are already kind of supported by our data here is pretty low. But I will say that given the proposed, I guess the extra layers, we hope that those speeds will continue going down. As for the larger vehicles, I think that's just kind of going to be a problem that we face in the coming years, I think. And it's already a challenge because when we tried to pilot even those speed tables that were compatible to EMS vehicles, you'd find the same issue where people are able to swerve, or if you have a giant truck or something, you know, it just kind of is a nothing. So yeah, that's a struggle that I think the traffic calming team will face for a while, but hopefully with the layered method of just one intervention vertical, another horizontal deflection, and hopefully like throughout the whole corridor, we're going to see reduced speeds as a result of this project. And again, it is really rare that we get to do a whole corridor like this. So the corridor-wide safety improvement is a really big deal, and I do hope that it will be less down to how high is this hump versus how high is this table, and it really will be the holistic treatment. And as people approach maybe something that everyone's perceiving as a little bit of like a wimpier treatment, that they'll be approaching that at a lower rate of speed and maybe in a more cautious fashion. So.
I'll just add too that while the larger vehicles may be able to go over the humps a little faster, they have a harder time with the horizontal deflection than small vehicles do. So again, that layered approach, I'm hoping we can see some improvements there.
All right, I think we're going to Zoom next. Was that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Is there a plan to expand parking authority enforcement over things like the bump outs and flex posts to make sure people are actually respecting them? And how do we actually, and so how do we actually impact the real behavior of drivers in our neighborhoods? I think I summarized that.
Okay, so the question was about Pittsburgh Parking Authority enforcing the no parking areas.
On bump outs and like respecting flex posts, not just weaving in between.
Okay, do you want to take that? Yeah, so I mean, we are in conversation with Pittsburgh Parking Authority about what that looks like. what we have been told is that if there is like an active blockage, you can call 911 and they are supposed to come out and address it. But if it's more of like a chronic parking thing, or somebody has been parked in a bump out for a really long time, that's more when the Pittsburgh Parking Authority will come out and they'll do potentially things like target enforcement. We don't have a really great answer for that at the time. I know that Council and the Parking Authority are passing some legislation about ticket by mail, which might, increase what they're able to do, but I don't really have enough information to speak to the details for this project in particular. Might be a question for some of the council folks, because I know they saw some of that legislation themselves. You.
I saw like the lack of accidents. I'm Adam, by the way, just a parent. In front of Gilbert, which is on the intersection of Stanton and Hamilton, and it's actually really safe, except for the 45 minutes in the morning where like every human being is coming, and then 45 minutes in the afternoon, every human being is leaving. And they try cops and they try better solutions. I just wanted to kind of maybe explore a little bit around like what's the thinking when like you have people like the worst side of the street when people are like halfway parked on the sidewalk. And I'm just wondering, like, if there's any exploration around just using something there that doesn't diminish the need for local residents to park, so it's right there, but at the same time doesn't create an excuse for like every truck and SUV park as they want in the queue, like in every direction, which causes like mayhem and all kinds of like angry, like toxic behavior for anyone who doesn't have a small unit that is going to.
So if I'm understanding it correctly, the question's about the intersection at Dilworth, Meadow, Heberton, and Stanton.
Just Heberton and Stanton, I think. Okay. I mean, I think that there's an echo there, but I'd say there's a four-way that's like on a bunch of angles, it's confusing. There's a four guard that sits there and tries to defend it, like just like 5 feet. It's like not. Yeah. There you are.
Explain you that. We already have the problem of it because we only use one line to people parking. Okay? We don't have it two lines. And the kids, especially in the afternoon, it's so crazy because I'm the only one person working. In the next block is Collins and Haverton. Kids crossing between cars because people parking all over. We only have one line. If you take off of this line, people they don't even have a parking anymore. People parking this, and I saw you the other day, remember I was talking?
Yeah.
People parking on the sidewalk. People, we don't have a handicap sign for these people. They want to go inside the school. You take off of this line, people they don't have enough parking where they can park. And we have a lot of kids walking in the Heberton, small kids. And so, I mean, I don't know what your decision it is, but it's going to be very hard for the
So going to consolidate those questions a little bit. So the question was about making sure people can make that crossing better, but not affecting residents' parking. Is that what you were?
Well, I think the parking is a secondary concern.
Okay.
So I think that there's just literally, I tracked when there's like over 80 kids that cross in like a 10-minute window right before school, and most of them are unsupervised except for the incredible work that support crossing guard is doing, right? And I think that there's just like, there's not like a lot of directional flow, there's no like kind of signal management, there's kind of like, there's no speed consolidation except for the stop signs, so people are queuing up, and then there's no kind of predictive patterns, like they're at least 50 yards away where people like know where to go, and so half the parents are just lost in trying to get to work.
I think what's going to be best is if we pull up that slide and maybe Paige can explain some of that a little bit better, and maybe show where some of the parking consolidation is as well. It's like the very last.
Yeah. So here's Collins, which again, we have heard about some of these crossing issues. First, I'll just say, to reiterate, we're not proposing any changes to parking on this section of the street. So I think there's a lot of problems here that are tough to sort out, especially when you said they're very short-lived. I think we certainly should be looking at more holistic approaches as to how we can get, I know the crossing guards are up against a lot. I haven't talked to a crossing guard who hasn't, the intersections they're at are some of the craziest intersections we've seen, and I know that there's a lot of intersections that don't get to have crossing guards because I know we're very limited and the schools are understaffed. So I think there's a lot to look at that are unfortunately unable to be solved with traffic engineering. But I do think that, again, if we can use these flex posts, which maybe we need to make sure, go out and do some field views after we've installed them to make sure that people are not able to park on the sidewalk or park in those bump outs as they approach these intersections, because we need those sight lines to be, like we were talking earlier, short people, we need those sight lines more than ever. So I think if we need to, analyze how this is working, see if we can work with police on targeted enforcement to make sure that those parking laws are being observed, and see what we can do, because I think the goal of this project is to reduce chaos. I know that sometimes there's too much chaos and maybe it'll become too much for the traffic engineering to really fix. But I do think that these designs will definitely not make the situation worse and should make it better, at least with what we can do within the scope of this project. And if you have further follow-up, maybe we can connect you, because we do have people at DOMI who specifically are trying to solve some of these school pickup drop-off problems that it's not just you, it's like every school we look at, because I think there's this cyclical problem of it feels dangerous to walk, so everyone is driving their kids to work. So we do hope that by improving safety for people that want to bike their kids to work or bike their kids to school or walk their kids to school, that over time we can see an improvement, because this is a very common problem. But I think we can commit to at least doing some not only do we collect data afterwards, but we do field views after. So we'll make sure to come back here during school time. I know that not me, but one of my colleagues worked pretty closely with Dilworth in the past to figure out some of the busing issues already. So we have a working relationship with the school that should help.
Before we move on, I just want to make sure you feel like your question was answered. Okay.
I think it's a really nice exploratory idea, but I think that I think about all the data we're talking about, and I think it's really underestimating pedestrian crossing dynamic here. So while I want to be very bike and sort of other forms of mobility focused, I'm still very pedestrian, ground zero.
Sure.
And I just don't understand how this design addresses people that are underreported policy.
Why can't it be 5 points up in Squirrel Hill, where there's a 5-point intersection and a long light? There's no light there, right?
True. No, there's definitely no light. But I thought that just kind of talking less of the past of someday we'll observe retroactively, and more what's happening now.
Paige, do you want to walk through exactly what the implementations of this is?
Yeah, because I do think the bump outs do lead to this exact problem. And what it does is it uses these gored out areas, do have flex posts in them so that no one can park too close to the crosswalks, because it's illegal to park within 20 feet of a crosswalk already. We're going to make sure that there's signs, that there's physical bump outs that physically restrict people from parking in those crosswalks or on those crosswalks. Additionally, and I should have mentioned this earlier with this question about ADA accommodations, any crosswalk that we put in is updated to a new ADA ramp within the year. So just having those sight lines and making sure that no one's parked too close, that's what makes that visibility, so that way we can up the yield and compliance of people using crosswalks. So if you can't yield to someone that you can't see. And so the biggest thing that a bump out does is just create those sight lines, and then also creating kind of a pinch point to slow down vehicles as they approach those crosswalks. So it will improve visibility, which is the biggest thing that we can do to reduce crashes and improve yielding compliance. So I know it seems like a meager update, but I think it will make a huge difference, especially for smaller humans. Yeah.
And if you want to follow up with us, I think I think there's enough questions that we'll be here to 8, but you can get my contact information. I'd be happy to follow up. We're going to go to Zoom real quick.
On at least 2 separate occasions, cars on Stanton and Highland have been hit at night. Will the proposed left turn lanes and safety measures help prevent future crashes? And I believe they mean of parked cars.
Okay. Parked cars. Okay, so yeah, the question was about reducing crashes with parked cars. I think reducing crashes reduces crashes for everyone. So when we're looking at those left turn lanes, reducing crashes by 30 to 50%, according to studies in other places they've done this, it should reduce speeds, improve sight lines, and make more predictable behavior, which leads to all sorts of crashes, including crashes with parked cars.
Question in the room?
Thank you, first of all, for, I mean, obviously a lot of that, and pedestrian drivers and vehicles. I have one follow-up question about the Dillard situation, so then I also want to. The follow-up question is around Dillard, the intersection of will those crosswalks also be protected in a way that cars cannot park on them? Because every single day at drop-off, and I think that there are cars parked in those crosswalks with kids crossing and cars back, like so that's our question about common. My other question is about Highland and Stanton. As you drive there, I love the idea of the left-hand lane. I can try to take it at that intersection. I get it that this is with those stuff, but is there any type of other outreach? You guys have, what do we have to do to make that happen? There's, I mean, 4 schools with people walking around there, it's like progress at that intersection. There's when you get a stop, there's no crossing guard. And I got a call if I had to get a kid there. Like, what do we have?
So I'll start by saying I'm sorry that happened to you, to your child. Yeah, so we're obviously glad that she's okay and want to prevent exactly those kinds of accidents. The first question was about the crosswalks at Collins and whether the bump out protections there would prevent parking. And then the second question is about the intersection at Highland and Stanton and whether it would be signalized in the future.
Yeah, so short answer about Collins is yes. Because of this shift in the travel lane, at least on the one approach, it's a little bit extra long bump out, so the sight line should be even better than the typical 20 feet bump out that we proposed. So yes, that's a major improvement that we'll see there. As for Highland, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I did spend many mornings watching some of the chaos at Highland. I'm surprised that it doesn't have a higher crash history from just the field visits, so I do understand where you're coming from. We did look into it. There's about 150 signals on our list for upgrades in the city. This one, we use prioritization that mostly looks at crash history and safety. And that's why, as a comparison, Negley got improved last year. There had been 7 pedestrian crashes in the 5-year analysis leading up to that intersection, which was why it was, at the very top of that priority list. Of the remaining ones, Highland is definitely in the top third of that priority list. So when we have very little control over the budget that comes to us, but it is on that list for those safety reasons. So I think that all we can do is hope that more budgets come through so that way we can get through that list a little faster. That being said, of course, the ones that are ahead of it on the list are because those problems are even worse. And I wish that there was more that we could do to upgrade them faster. I think it's interesting to think about this whole project. The budget is $150,000 in the capital budget. A signal is going to cost at least $300,000. So it's just a totally different scale of what we can do. And we wish that we could do more to be faster. So we'll make it through the list as fast as we can, and we can work with the council people to try to find that funding. Yeah.
All right, we're going to go to Zoom.
Why did they remove the crossing guard at Stanton and Negley if the intersection is so hazardous?
Why did they move the crossing guard at Stanton and Negley if it's so hazardous? I don't know that Domi has an answer to that. I don't have an answer to that. It's certainly something we can reach out to our folks in public safety about. I'm sure folks are aware that there's a limited number of school crossing guards, and in the same way that DOMI is prioritizing where they are spending their funds, their staff hours, public safety is doing the same with school crossing guards. So hopefully the benefit of real infrastructure, reduces the need for a school crossing guard. I think there was a question here, and then I know you've had your hand raised for a while, so I see you. So we'll go here, Zoom, and then you. Yep.
Hi, yeah, I wanted to go back to Highland and Stanton for a second. If you're looking at eastbound Stanton Avenue, cars come flying around that intersection on the southbound Highland. Is there anything in the plans that helps mitigate that? I mean, again, going to the kids that are crossing there,
Could you repeat which intersection? I didn't hear it. Maybe Paige did.
It's Highland, but
Okay.
you said eastbound to,
westbound, sorry. Westbound Stanton, turning left onto southbound Highland.
okay.
From number 2 a while.
Sure, okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I was like, starting to get it. I mean, I think in our field views, it seems like a lot of these turns, people are moving too fast. So all we can do is try to tighten up those intersections and add some of this protection. So I think that's the kind of signal thing we could make a bigger improvement on when that signal update comes into play. But right now, all we can do is add the bump outs and try to slow vehicles that way. But all of these turning movements are pretty extreme. So I understand where you're coming from.
Laura, did you have a question on Zoom?
Oh, no.
No? Okay. All right, so we'll go here then.
First of all, I want to say I'm a four-season cyclist. I'm on both parts of phase 2 and phase 1 twice a day, every day. I greatly appreciate the thoughtfulness of this project, including the idea of the fast-moving traffic and the parking next to cars. I think this is beyond what I would have thought the city was willing to do, and I'm deeply grateful. My question is, in addition to the parking, I have an elderly family member that lives on North St. Clair, just on one block off of Stanton. Was recently involved in a little fender bender because of the poor visibility. I didn't really get a chance to see as we went through the slides what that intersection looks like. And additionally, we've gone on walks trying to get to Bryant Street to cross Stanton, which has been terrifying. And she will not do it without someone with her. She will not do it alone. She's not super mobile, right? So I'm just wondering about the bump outs. Is there an intention? Okay, thank you for pointing that. That's okay. That was going to be one of my questions. Was there pop up on both on every single corner, which there is, and that's wonderful. And the bump out, though, if someone were to need a pause, I mean, I know it's not big, but it's big for some people. What does that look like? I mean, I'm on Ellsworth every day too on my bike. Is it that? Is there ever going to be an idea that it could be more than the flex post if someone needs that extra protection when they're walking? Because, Bryant is a great walk, mostly flat, but Stanton is such a wall that people don't want to pass.
So the question was about the St. Clair intersection, and then I think more specifically the pedestrian refuge islands, what kind of protection they offer, and whether they might offer more protection in the future. Is that fair summary? Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that question. This is exactly why we hope the pedestrian refuge islands will help the most with is those crossings. I'm sorry it looks so faint. That's because those crosswalks already exist. So this construction plan set is just showing that they already exist, and that's why they're lighter. But yeah, we're going to be, not only are there bump outs that we're proposing on Stanton, but also on the side streets so that the full sight line through the corner is maintained. This is quick build materials, like we said, and as we had alluded to earlier, there's a lot of maintenance attached to that. So I do think it would be wonderful if, this proves that this geometry can work, that this design is working. Of course, we'd be open with budgeting to making these out of more with concrete and permanent materials. The flex posts are very helpful in the meantime, and they allow us to do things quickly and cheaply. But yeah, we agree that it'd be nice to see in the future. So I think we can work with our council people on that.
Zoom question?
2 questions. Could the bike lanes be parking protected instead of being exposed to traffic? And a question after that is, will there be a follow-up in the future to harden the existing changes or extend the bike lane further along Stanton? And they comment, extending the bike lanes toward Heberton would reduce the need to own or park a car on the street.
Okay, so the question online was about parking protected bike lanes. I assume most of the folks in here who are cyclists know what the concept of a parking protected bike lane is, but just for everybody else's knowledge, it's basically putting the bike lane between parked cars and the curb, using the parked cars as protection from moving vehicles. So I'll hand it off to Paige to answer that. I think the second part of the question was about extending the bike lane past Heberton on Stanton.
Yeah, that's a good question. The width here is about, I think we said 36 feet. So in order to provide a protected bike facility, there wouldn't be, in both directions, there wouldn't be any parking left on the street with the existing curb to curb. So I don't think a parking protected bike lane would be strongly considered here. I think if we, if at some point things changed, we wanted to remove all the parking, that's the only way that we could do a protected bike facility. But it wouldn't be parking protected. It would use something like the concrete curbs you see downtown or flex posts, just because of the constraints in the curb to curb width. Similarly, I think, this is a big proposal. It doesn't preclude future bike lanes. So if there's something you'd like to see in the future, there's no reason that this will, is saying that we'll never have bike lanes in some of these other areas. It's just not within the project scope, what we're doing in 2024. The Bike Plus plan did, I think the original Bike Plus plan had the bike lane, the bike connection going to Euclid, and it was because of community input during some of our East Liberty planning or some of the other planning phases we did, that now the Highland is on slated for future bike lanes because of input from people. There's not that there's an imminent project to do that, but just an example of how community support can change can change what the network will look like in the future.
All right, we're gonna go back there and then we'll come up here. Yep, that's you.
So I lived on Stanton between Highland and Beckley for 21 years. Kids were born here, so walk, bike, buses, and everything. Some of my concerns are, yes, I have heard accidents at various times of the day from turning from the residential streets onto Stanton. Feels like some of that's going to be installed a long time ago with a little pavement sign that says they're parking here in the corner. But it feels like this is like a done deal and it's coming, so I'm just trying to react to this here. I'm worried now that the new concern to me is that I'm trying to make a turn again, like 20 minutes later or Ellen or whatever, onto Stanton, and instead of worrying about parking, which is scary, I'm now concerned that I hit a cyclist who may or may not be slowing down as they're going across. And equally, more than, I don't know what the data is to see a person on the bike and then you at nighttime, which is when the accident, the fatal accident occurred, which we heard, at 1 in the morning, lighting is really improved as well. But I'm concerned that all of a sudden I might hit a cyclist. So that's one. And then these bump outs, they're pain, right? I don't quite know how to envision it, although I drive elsewhere every morning to work. I drive Stanton Avenue, so I see some of the things that have been done. I'm worried that we have an accident like the one that goes with the young woman who was killed because of staggering car and bike. Maybe bikes over there. I'm just worried about the condensing of the width of the cars and 2 cars on the bike. And then just lastly, I need to be more in favor.
What was the last one? Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I hate the class typing and I
Okay.
need to be more in favor of something.
All right, so three questions and comments. First one was about turning from the side streets onto Stanton, maybe being less concerned now about cars, but more concerned about cyclists, given they have a dedicated lane. The second one, I'm totally blanking right now. I just jumped to the third.
I couldn't quite visualize when you have a staggered bike car, like you're restricting
Okay.
room for the bikes and the cars, and I'm worried about staggering and impatient.
Gotcha. So about the space for bikes and vehicles, given the condensed roadway condition. And then the final thing was a comment about not being a fan of the plastic, which, yeah, noted.
Yeah, I should have brought better examples of some of the bump outs. I had some better examples of the refuge islands. I do think Ellsworth, though, is a good example, if you are able to get out there, of what a painted bump out can look like. Again, the goal is always sight lines, so if you're pulling out, even though there will be an additional bike lane, the bikes will be in a very predictable place in the bike lane, and they also will be very visible. Well, sure, yeah. Well, we do currently have, cyclists using Stanton already today. The shared facility that is there is not serving cyclists. There has been crashes, so we would like to, improve safety, and we do have, studies that show that adding the bike lane should reduce total crashes, and that's not just for bike crashes, that's total crashes by 30%. I think part of the reason is there is more visibility because there's a little bit more space. So I understand, I think that, we know that this will make it safer. And while there might be different types of, there will be less crashes overall with these, and that's something we feel very firmly about. So it should improve things generally.
Seeing the data after, because I assume this is going to be all at once, but not just one intersection, and it's going to come through all at once. So
Sure.
data after. And the last thing, lived in the Southwest quad for 20-some years when it was first here in the beginning, and when it has stabilized. And it's nice that other people in Highland Park don't think that the parking is such a concern in our quadrant. Parking is definitely. It's not a question.
Okay, yeah, and we'll note that. Is there a question on Zoom, Laura?
Yeah. Someone asks, what can we do to ensure Domi gets increased budget to make our streets safer?
So the question was about increasing Domi's budget. I'll let Paige answer that. I'm in the mayor's office. I think what I will also say is that we go through an annual budget engagement cycle that should kick off in May, June of this year, where we take preliminary feedback. The departments listen to the feedback residents have. I know one of the reasons that, for instance, this year, the amount of budget for traffic calming was increased was because of what our departments, the mayor's office, council folks heard at those meetings. So again, budget is one of those places where your voices are equally, if not more important, than advocating for bike lanes or anything else that you would advocate for.
Yeah, no, I don't really have anything to add. Just continue to advocate for it. I think we heard the #1 most requested thing at the mayor's office level last year was traffic calming, which if you told me that 5 years ago, I would have never believed you. But it's so exciting to see the support, and so continuing to advocate and come to these public meetings means a lot.
Yep, you had a question.
So back to the North St. Clair, Mellon intersection, it's very residential. My niece travels across Stanton to get from her house to my house all the time. She goes to use this because there's a four-way stop and it's safer. I know this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I can't imagine stop signs are very expensive. Would that be a future or current idea to be able to slow traffic? Because this is a large stretch without any kind of stop and would slow traffic now, I think.
So the question is about adding more stop signs along the corridor, maybe particular Mellon or St. Clair.
People respect the limits.
Yeah, that's a good question, and something that we did hear in the stakeholder walkthrough as well. One of the first things we did, stop signs are strictly known as a regulatory measure. They have some pretty strict rules attached to them, including warrants for putting them in. And the reason for that is because if they are, and I think there's a lot of examples in the city that can attest to this, if they're unwarranted, the efficacy goes down quite a bit. And not only for that stop sign, but all stop signs actually, but particularly unwarranted ones. And so we have to be careful where we put them. So we run a stop warrant analysis, which we did for every single intersection on this corridor. Roughly, you need about 2/3 the volume on the cross streets as you do on that main street to warrant a stop sign. And that's just a pretty strictly enforced measure because they are designed to determine right-of-way and not to be used as a traffic calming device. So I understand where you're coming from. We're hoping that these pedestrian refuge islands can offer some of that same compliance and improve the respect to the crosswalk without making unjust measures that might result in less safety overall.
Paige, could you just?
Yeah.
I heard somebody asking about what warranted might mean. So Paige, I don't know if you want to answer that.
Yeah, no, warranted. So this is all just engineering talk, but it's just like stop warrants are defined by the MU2CD, the municipal, or MU2CD, which is like the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices that the entire nation falls under. And there is, liability with putting in something unwarranted that could result in something unsafe. So those are all outlined for us. And so when we do these stop control warrants, we run data analysis of the volumes, the thresholds on each street, as well as field views to make sure that, because, I think it would kind of be all of them or none of them. They're all pretty similar to each other. And so there's not like one specific place that stood out that would benefit the most from a stop sign that is warranted.
We're going to go to Zoom, and then we'll go here, and then work our way back there.
I don't have any Zoom questions, but I wanted to make a quick plug. If you did not email neighbor@pittsburghpa.gov to be here or scan a QR code on your way in, but would like to continue to get updates, and if you are not following the Complete Streets Engage PGH page, I would encourage you to follow it or scan a QR code on your way out, because we will be sending updates about these things. Otherwise, I don't know how to connect with you, and I'm not trying to spam you. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And we'll go here.
So speaking of crosswalk compliance, I've noticed a bunch of intersections around the city have gotten flashing lights with a button control so that they can get the attention of motorists without having a constant nag. I assume that's probably outside of the scope of the quick build design. Is that something that's more budget friendly than a full signal upgrade, or is that how does that fit into plan?
Yeah. So the question was about the flashing lights, the rectangular rapid flashing beacon, learning my whatever, one way or another, and whether those are part of the scope or could be part of the scope. Solid Page.
Yeah. First I'll say they are much less expensive than traffic signals, but they are still incredibly expensive. I think we're exploring ways to use more of them. We have seen some success, but I will say we haven't seen, and maybe you can speak to this, Katie, but it seems like the jump from pedestrian refuge island to RRFB compliance is not as huge as you would expect. You see a lot of that feedback with these super low cost measures that also don't rely on someone finding the button and opting into it. So they work more passively, which I think is a benefit. Not that they couldn't be considered in the future. Great question, thank you.
Laura, is there anything on Zoom?
Not right now.
Okay. And I've been missing your hand, so we're going to go here and then go this way.
So in terms of crosswalks, especially around the schools, people are speeding through them, and even with light there, people are going to try to make that orange light as quickly as they can and do speeding. Definitely in the paint of that infrastructure camp. Since we have budget for, what do you call them, raised, not speed bumps.
Speed tables.
Is there any chance for making some of these crosswalks raised using speed tables?
So the question was about raised crossings as opposed to potentially the speed tables. So applying the same strategies, but more at crosswalks than mid-block.
Yeah, I guess so. The raised crosswalks are something that we usually do use at a mid-block location rather than at intersections because you'll get that like twofold, vertical deflection and a crosswalk. It's probably something we could consider, but I'm not the right person to answer this question in its entirety.
I guess, yeah, something we've been experimenting more in the city. We haven't scaled it out. We've been trying to save it sort of for these mid-block crossings. There is some drainage issues that come with it and ADA concerns about installing them just right to make them work. I think they're great tools, but given that this is a corridor treatment, I think we are defaulting to corridor level traffic calming, and we tend to use those for specific intersections. But it doesn't mean that, they're not always the right tool for them, and we haven't used them at a full corridor length because the traffic calming corridor, like the way that they really work is by having that spacing just right. The spacing is pretty strictly defined, and that's because you want to avoid people slowing down just at the hump and then speeding off. So the spacing is really important, and I think that prioritizing that spacing for corridor level review doesn't always line up perfectly with the intersections, which is why we instead opted for the horizontal deflection there. But that's a really good question, and not off the table, especially with future projects. Thanks.
Or anything on Zoom?
Someone asked, or said rather, people tend to make an informal right turn at Negley on Stanton going toward Highland, which makes no sense but is very common at rush hour. It's been a hazard for the cyclists, so I'm wondering if in the rollout, if there will be explicit signage or perhaps communications from the city to discourage an informal right turn at Negley and Stanton. At Negley on Stanton going towards Highland, sorry.
Okay, so the question is about informal right turns from Stanton onto Negley, headed towards Highland, Dilworth, etc.
Negley onto Stanton. Is that it?
Stanton onto Negley or?
Negley on Stanton.
Yeah.
Okay.
Negley onto Stanton. Interesting. Yeah, we put up no right on red signs. I think that might have come with the traffic signal that we would like to see higher compliance with. We do hope that some of these protected intersection elements could further, discourage that kind of illegal behavior, but also advocate with the council people about getting enforcement, or not just council people, it's a state level, but we'd really like to see eventually automated red light enforcement for things like this, because it is something that's sometimes difficult with the design. I will just add, though, that we heard that was a big issue for Stanton onto Negley, which is a big reason we're looking at this bus boarding island. I don't think there's room on Negley for something like that in this place, but maybe the protected intersection flex posts will make that an even more uncomfortable movement and, up compliance, we hope.
All right, I think there was a question over here.
My name is Jason. I live on Negley Avenue in East Liberty, and I've noticed that it feels like, I have a comment and then a question. I've noticed that it feels like there's a lot of parallels between the way that Negley is designed right now and how Stanton will be designed, in that there's bike lanes in both directions and parking on one side of the road. And as someone who has to bike on Negley, basically if I want to get anywhere, I just wanted to say how important those bike lanes have been to me, because ever since I moved to the city recently enough that they've always been there. I recently experienced what it would be like to not have those bike lanes when the bike lane near the intersection of 10 was closed due to the construction of the bank on that corner. While that bike lane was closed, I was trying to bike on Negley, and I had to merge left into the lane of motor vehicle traffic. And a bus that was behind me tried to pass me even though I was picking up the whole lane, and that resulted in a crash. So I imagine that Stanton Avenue feels like a very similar situation. It's also used by a lot of buses, has a similar width, and I imagine that that's what every cyclist feels right now when they try to bike Stanton, and it's not just a temporary situation due to some construction. So I'm very eager to see this improvement for everyone who lives on Stanton and has to bike on it, just like I have to bike on Negley to get anywhere. My question is about the bike lane that is right next to the parking. I know one of the things that I am scared about and have nightmares about sometimes is getting hit by a car door that's opening while biking right next to parked cars. And the guidance, I think, is to bike at least 4 feet away from cars so that you aren't going to get hit by a car door that unexpectedly opens. However, I often feel that on Negley Avenue, next to the parked cars, there's not enough space to do this, especially because the travel lanes are fairly narrow and there are lots of buses on that road which are pretty wide, and often the right side of the bus's wheels are covering the painted bike lane as we're passing me, which results in me being uncomfortably close to the parked cars. And I'm just wondering if there will end up being a similar situation on Stanton. Obviously, the bike lane is way better than nothing, but are we still going to have people like feeling uncomfortable as they bike past parked cars and get passed by buses?
Okay, so the first comment was, and I'm sorry that sounds like you were involved in an accident. Sorry that happened to you. I know one thing from my conversation with some other folks in Domi is they are looking at ways to better reroute bike lanes when construction impacts bike lanes. So in the same way that travel lane shift, looking at ways to protect bike lanes during construction as well. So hopefully some good news there. I know that that's in the works. I think the second question was about still feeling uncomfortable on Negley and presumably potentially on Stanton because of the location of the bike lane in proximity to the door zone of cars, and also kind of being trapped between buses and vehicles passing you on the left. Is that fair summary? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for that thoughtful question. I am sorry that happened to you. I think about Negley a lot as an example project. I think something that we can learn from Negley is that I was looking at some of the FHWA bike selection guidelines, and while bike lanes, Negley has slightly higher volumes than Stanton, but something that we notice on Stanton is that, like, in order for a bike lane to be an appropriate tool by some of these guidelines, you really have to bring down those speeds, even if the volumes are okay. And Negley, I think, would benefit, and I know we're looking at upgrading Negley in the future. Negley benefit from traffic calming to be alongside those with the bike lane improvements, because bike lanes enough, we know now, is not enough by itself. Something else that I'll add, though, is that there has been a decent amount of studies that talk about bike lane versus shared condition when it comes to getting doored. I wish that we had a few more feet on this street, I really do, so that way we could do wider bike lanes. Like we said, I mentioned earlier, we prioritized a 5-foot bike lane in the door zone and a 4-foot bike lane against the curb, so we could have that extra foot of shy distance so that you're not so close to the parked vehicles, which I know we don't have when there's just a curb next to you. So that is, it's still minimums, I understand, but it's a little something. And the other thing I'll mention is that there's been a lot of studies that show that dooring actually will go down with a bike lane compared to a shared condition or sharrows. That's something that I think Seattle had the most significant study on that when they took a sharrow road and they put in a 4-foot door zone bike lane, dooring went down. And I think the reason for that is probably the predictability of knowing where cyclists will be and having that visual indicator for vehicles that there could be a cyclist in that door zone, because I think in shared conditions, while we like to think that a lot of us know it's safest to ride in the middle of the road, it feels uncomfortable and you feel forced into that door zone regardless. So while we know it's, if there was more space, we'd be able to do more. But we do feel confident that this will improve safety and reduce dooring overall from the current conditions.
I'm going to assume yes.
Yeah, Nick, I can hear you if you could talk.
Okay, great. So Yeah, this is a back to the question I had just asked them.
So they want more clarification about the right turn lanes on Neckley and Stanton.
Can we follow up with them? Can they like send the word for word question? We'll send them a follow up. Thanks. And if they have more clarity, we'll answer that. I think some people have had their hands raised for a really long time and I've been ignoring you. So if you're somebody that has had your hand up for a long time, just keep your hand up for a second. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So thanks for this presentation. I want to ask a question about drainage. So I live here at Stanton, and as you know, the big deal and water rain, climate change, rural rain, and things like that. And the current drainage for the storm drain will always be up and down. And so when I think about this, I imagine that the next step is to follow
So the question was about Heths and Stanton in particular already having drainage issues and whether the speed tables might exacerbate that.
Yeah, so to mitigate that problem, we do leave either like 1 or 2 feet of space on either side of the speed table to kind of channel whatever is being carried where it needs to go. So luckily it's not flush with the curb and does leave room for drainage. But if you are noticing like a lot of accumulation of like leaf debris or other things in inlets or drains, I would definitely 311 it, and DPW or our streets department, we can definitely investigate further. It might just be that things need cleaned out or evaluated. But yeah, thank you.
And then you. Go ahead. Yep.
I just had a comment. I interact with Stanton Avenue every single day by on foot, on bike, in my car. These improvements are so needed, and I just want to say thank you because there are so many dangerous intersections. I've witnessed crashes, I've seen accidents. The Stanton Ave Phase 1, I love it. I know there's haters. Thank you. Like I go up and down that hill every single day, and it's like dramatically improving safety in my life. So I just want to say thank you.
I'll pass that thank you on to Domi. Laura, real quick, is there anything on?
Yeah, what about if there's an unsafe situation when there's construction?
So questions about unsafe situations during construction, presumably of this project.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you mean this project or other projects. A lot of these, because they're quick build, are pretty easy construction, which is great. We can be in and out of there pretty quick. We can, we don't always have to, we usually don't have to close the road to do the construction. We can do like half of the road at a time, use flaggers to move quickly. So I think that this will be low impact construction-wise for those of you that live here. To echo what Jan said earlier about Domi is trying to upgrade our bike MPT, maintenance and protection of traffic for bikes. We are working on that actively. I've been reviewing some policies. I know a lot of the people that work in these kinds of approve the permits and do this construction are not as familiar with bikes as some of the engineers that work in traffic are. So I do encourage you to always 311 these kinds of things because sometimes we don't know what we don't know, and I can't look at every permit that comes through. So we really rely on some of you for help to know where these issues are.
We'll go here, and then I see you, and then we'll come here. Yep.
So yeah, I live in Stanton Heights. I commute to Oakland by bike every day, year round. So the first thing I wanted to say, kind of echoing your point, is thank you. Like this is much needed. I find this stretch of Stanton Avenue so stressful that I just avoid it. So I come down the hill of Stanton Avenue, I make a turn which is left, make a left on Baywood Street, and then a right on Neckley, and I just totally avoid this area. When this all happens, I'm probably going to use Stanton Avenue again. And now I'm wondering, what about all the cars that want to speed? Are they now going to make a right on Chisholm and a left on Baywood and start speeding down those streets? And so I was just wondering if any improvements to those streets is within the scope of this project, and if not, if there will be any monitoring of the conditions on those streets?
So the question is about, with the reduction in speeds, the hopeful reduction in speeds, whether traffic gets potentially diverted to other streets that don't have those controls where folks feel like they can speed.
I mean, already, like Chisholm Street already can't drag the street on that stretch between Stanton and White Street.
So I will say, I think we've done like a little bit of preemptive traffic calming in the Morningside neighborhood, probably as part of our phase 1 and whatever, I keep calling phase 1B or phase 2 part 1. But as part of our post-construction analysis, we do look at parallel routes or like detours to make sure that because there are 2 goals for traffic calming, reduction in speed, and then the second is a reduction in volume. So we do expect people to find alternative routes, but we do evaluate those routes to make sure that they're not all of a sudden the next big hazard. So we usually will give like a few months for things to kind of regulate and people to acclimate to the new conditions, and then we'll deploy counters. I could see field views in our future. But yeah, that will definitely be part of the post-construction analysis.
Laura, anything? Okay. I forget who I promised could go next, but I think it was you and then you.
Yes, Dave Anglero. So echoing, there's definitely a lot of work going on here, very appreciative. And I wouldn't want to have your jobs. 100%. So I have a couple questions and a couple comments. One was mentioned earlier about like the maintenance to the bike lanes that are already there. I mean, tree limbs, leaves, whatever, that's one thing, but like the potholes get scary, and all of a sudden you're like, what do I do? Do I just hit this thing, or do I try to jump into this car lane here? And to me, it goes into a reflection that we're not maintaining what we have to add new. And if we're adding new, and if this is like a communication challenge that's happening in the administration, it's already not happening. So we're now adding a whole bunch of new infrastructure, and we can't maintain what we have. So that's one part.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So the other thing is, what is our plan for education? This is a lot of upgrades for just this strip. But if you look at all the other projects you guys have going on, which is fantastic, there's a lot of traffic changes that are happening. And I would bet that there's probably a lot of us here that already understand a lot of the terminology here. But we've already had like comments back and forth between a speed bump, and the last time that probably any of us took a test was when we were 16. Okay, so from my vantage point, I can see that I think you guys are like kind of like an arm from PennDOT. Where is the education that is, for the rest of the public? If you go right outside of Pittsburgh, there's so many people that don't even know what bike lane is, let alone all the other infrastructure that's going on. So we're left to the signage that's on the street to help educate us. I see that so spin is gone, but we have some of these stations that are still left with LED signage that starts to have, there's one of those signs in there that has education on it. But this is our last chance to educate people on how to operate a vehicle, which also goes into the point that we tend to lean to this, we have a bike culture and a car culture when we're all vehicles. And the education between those two, is not happening. So it's not necessarily one is not learning and one is not learning. It's that we're not learning what the changes are. So I guess the question at the end is what are we doing to educate the people?
All right, so the first question was about maintenance. Again, I'll reiterate 311. I think I'll let Paige maybe validate this, but I think the hope is that we're not actually adding anything. We're converting, what's a vehicle lane to bike lanes, and bikes are much less impactful on city streets. So I think hopefully actually the maintenance might go down. Maybe Paige can validate that. I don't know. That's the impression I get from other parts and other places. The second piece is about education. Obviously, there's some catch up to do. My role is outside of DOMI, and every day, I have the good fortune of being able to ask DOMI what something means, what something does. So part of my role is going to be to try and do some of that education. I'm only one person. Paige also mentioned our Safe Routes to Schools coordinator who's doing elementary and school education. But again, I agree. I think there's more we can be doing to educate people about the changes to their streets. So hopefully have more to come on that, but can't really speak to the PennDOT piece of that.
Yeah, I can't really speak for PennDOT, so I won't do that today, but I will say that, it's a complicated problem. It's very hard to explain some of these things. Luckily in Pittsburgh, I know we have a lot of great partners that are doing a lot of that work, Bike Pittsburgh in particular. They're doing a lot of education components. I will say that from a traffic engineering standpoint and looking at this project, all of these design features are designed to be understood. You don't need to know what it's called for it to improve safety for everyone around you. So I think that when we look at, these are all very strictly defined by federal state guidelines that I've mentioned a few times now. And so the reason for that is because they are studied for years before they even go off the ground. And even PennDOT is starting to do some of these interventions, even places that typically are very conservative when it comes to changes like this, are seeing how much they are proven to improve safety and are starting to do them themselves and encourage them in other places. So I think, I think education is super important. I wish that, there was ways for people to maybe have to take a test again past the age of 16. I think that would be great, but I'm merely a traffic engineer.
Right towards insurance.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Yeah, I definitely think we need more holistic approaches around education. Absolutely. I will say the good news is, I think these ideally will get less people in cars too. So those people that don't want to drive will have options, so they don't have to be on the roads. And I think reducing the amount of cars on the road is also a valid solution for trying to reduce these crashes.
We'll get to your question. We are running out of time. We reserved the space till 8. I want to be respectful of the folks here. I think we will stand around and linger if there's other folks that want to come up and ask questions. Otherwise, again, use the email here and we will route your question to the right place. But I know you've had your hand raised, so if you want to be the last question for the night.
Hi, I'm Adam. I live in Stanton Heights, and as a year-long cyclist, I use Stanton Avenue daily. And I want to thank you again for phase 1 and phase 2. My question is, are there any plans to extend the climbing lane from Lawrenceville to McCandless? And also, are there any plans to possibly put in speed tables or something on the other side of Stanton Avenue to climb? That's straightaway, which for the bike lane is great, but the cars still go 45, 50, low riding up there. It's kind of dangerous.
So the question is about continuing the other phase of Stanton phase 1 towards Lawrenceville.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know we've thought a lot about Stanton to McCandless. I guess we can call that phase 3. I know it's on Councilman Gross's mind. So I think it's definitely not out of the question. I would love to, find budget so that we could do something like that there. As for the speed tables, are you talking about on the really steep part where there's the climbing lane, not having them?
Particularly Morningside Ave up towards Sunnyside. There is that bump out with the gentleman that has the handicapped spot. But cars still fly up there. And when there was a water main burst, and there was cars were veering to the bike lane, and there's still a little bit of bumpage there that they still swing the bike lane continuously at 40 mile an hour, and it's not ideal.
Yeah, unfortunately, the speed humps are not really designed for steep slopes, which most cities aren't up against what we're up against. And it always baffles me how it seems like sometimes the fastest speeds are going uphill. Pretty intense. I think we would love to try to, as traffic calming emerges as a commonplace thing, I think we'd love to consider ways that we can do more traffic calming on slopes. But, traditional speed humps are not really, there's like a % grade that.
Usually 8 is the technical
8%.
cutoff, but we will go up to maybe like 10 or
so like 10%
but
grade.
Beyond that, it's just not safe, really, for like the downhill condition, I think. But it becomes a liability for one reason or another, unfortunately. But
that is good feedback. I think that we can do more. I think things like, I know that's a protected climbing lane, narrowing the road is still something we can do on slopes. And, as the science emerges, I'd love to be able to go back and do more. So I appreciate that feedback.
All right, it is 8 o'clock on the dot. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you all for supporting Domi. I think the council people also deserve a round of applause for supporting projects like these. And thank you all for spending a beautiful evening indoors with us talking about traffic. But yeah, thank you and have a good night. If you have any questions, we'll be around for a little bit longer.
Thank you.